Can't sleep when I lay in bed. Too much thinking in my head. I don't know what to do anymore. Well, come on now, tell me the score. Is there anything I can do to get out of these tragic blues? I'm a victim of circumstance. I never really had a chance. I lay down and stare at my feet. You know the world has got me beat.
Welcome to today's edition of Mental Health Matters. Today we're going to be talking about the homeless population here in Sacramento County. I want to welcome you to our show and thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule, because I know you're pretty busy. Let's start off by you introducing yourself.
Hi, my name's Noel Kammerman, and I am the new executive director over at Sacramento Loaves Fishes.
Nice, nice, nice. So how long have you been at Loaves Fishes?
I've been there a whopping 3 whole months, so I'm still getting the lay of the land and getting to know everybody.
Okay. So why don't you tell everybody what is Loaves Fishes here in Sacramento County?
So Loaves Fishes is it's a nonprofit here in Sacramento that serves the homeless. We provide a wide variety of what we call survival services that folks need just to make it from one day to the next.
Wow.
So in some cases that's food, sometimes that's clothing, sometimes it's showers. In some cases we help folks out, figuring out their community service requirements. Nice. and we provide schooling for kids who are experiencing homelessness with their families. So it's a whole host of end-to-end services that we provide all under one umbrella.
Wow. And so what is the age that you guys teach at the school?
So we serve children anywhere from preschool on up to 15.
Wow. Wow.
And then for other ages and situations we make accommodations where necessary, but a lot of times we're trying to provide age-appropriate curriculum, or I should say grade-appropriate curriculum, and then also trying to make sure that we are able to connect the children into the public school systems where appropriate.
Wow. I know when I previous met with you, I was telling you that I didn't know that Loaves Fishes provided as many services to Sacramento County community as you do. Before I started talking to you and doing my research, when I heard of Loaves Fishes, I only associated Loaves Fishes with feeding the homeless population. Mm-hmm. But when I met with you, you kind of let me know that you guys do just more than that, more than just feed the homeless population. I know we kind of talked about too. Do you guys provide any type of medical treatment to any clients or anything like that, or?
No, so the homeless guests that come and see us, while we don't provide the medical care ourselves,
okay,
we have what we call the Mercy Clinic there on site.
Okay, nice.
And that's run by the Sisters of Mercy.
Nice.
We have nurses that come in and provide medical care to folks right there on site.
Wow.
In regards to the mental health side of things, we have our Genesis Mental Health Clinic, which provides counseling and referral services for folks that are experiencing symptoms of mental illness.
Wow, wow. How many people do you guys normally feed a day, if you had to guess?
Well, we typically provide 2 different meals right now during the week. Mm-hmm. We provide a breakfast that serves anywhere between 200 and 300 meals.
Wow.
Just in that situation, and then there's also our dining room that provides lunch to folks each day, and that can go at the beginning of the month. That goes from anywhere between 400 to 600 to the end of the month, which is closer to 600 and 800 people that are fed each and every day.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot. Do you guys Like if they needed like a place to come and change clothes or shower, are they able to do that there on site?
Sure. So for the men that come to us, we have what we call our wash house program, where they're able to come in, get a fresh set of clean clothes, especially if they're going to go out for a job interview or anything like that.
Nice.
They can get a shower, get all cleaned up for the day. Our women are able to get showers and services for them at another program called Mary House. It's on site. And Mary House is much more of it's a more full service drop-in center for single women and families that are experiencing homelessness.
Wow, wow. So where are you guys located here in Sacramento County?
So we're at 1351 North C Street. The corner of North C and Ahern is the location of our Welcome Center, but we have a large kind of triangle property that covers quite a bit of space with all of our different services, Friendship Park, Genesis Mental Health Clinic, and all the other programs that are located on site there.
Wow, wow. So I know you kind of talked about being executive director for 3 months there. So how are you getting acclimated in your new role?
It's definitely a learning process because I'm also brand new to the Sacramento area.
Yeah.
So I came here from the East Coast. I'd made a similar transition when I went from the New York homeless system and a nonprofit serving the homeless there. When I transitioned to another nonprofit in the Connecticut area, so it's a whole new set of state agencies, other nonprofits, a whole bunch of new acronyms to learn.
Yeah.
So I've been through that process before, and so I'm making a similar transition now. So really the first month I spent a lot of time trying to get to know the staff as well as the volunteers and guests that we see every day. So we have, a whole large number of volunteers that come in each and every day to help us serve meals, provide services out in Friendship Park, help out in all the different programs that are there, whether it's Sister Nora's Place, our women's shelter, there's Mary House, which is the drop-in center I mentioned, Genesis. And we could not provide all the services that we provide without the help of all these wonderful volunteers.
Yes, I understand that.
So after the first month, I spent that time, like I said, getting to know staff, volunteers, and guests. And then after that, I've been trying to branch out and meet with community partners, leads from other nonprofits that serve the homeless, our elected officials. I've been trying to sit down with those folks over time to get to know them, introduce myself, and see what we can do about coordinating services going forward.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I know your background, I know we kind of talked, and you have experience with this population, the homeless population. This isn't like your first role dealing with the homeless population. I know when I previously met with you, I asked you, I said, what made you want to, or what gave you the, drive or encouragement to work, or passion to work with this particular population? Let's talk a little bit about that, because I think it's important to highlight that, because when you have people in certain roles, people are not just in these roles just to be in these roles. You're in your role because you have a passion to work with this particular population from your level.
Sure. So I first got started working with folks experiencing homelessness back when I was doing my master's degree. I was working at I was interning at the Health Resource Center in downtown Cincinnati.
Nice.
The Over the Rhine area is what they call it, and it's this area where folks tend to congregate, and it's an area where just a large concentration of homeless and indigent population there. And we were providing mental health services, counseling services, a lot of supportive counseling for folks. And once I started providing that work and just doing the one-on-one, counseling with folks, it was kind of that call to me that just told me that, hey, this is what I should be doing.
That's awesome.
And once I started that, I didn't see any other path forward at that point in time.
Yeah.
So here I am.
Nice. So let's talk a little bit about the challenges that the homeless population face, because I want to really kind of hit on that so that people can really understand, because I think a lot of times when we see homeless people out in the community, I think there's a stigma attached to that population as well. I've been involved in conversations with people that have their own opinion about the homeless population. Some people say, well, you know, they got family here, why won't they just go live with their families, or you know, why can't they just get a job? Whatever the case may be, but you don't know until you're in a person's situation per se. So let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges that they're facing here in Sacramento County. What do you think some of the challenges that the homeless population are facing here?
I would say one of the major challenges that folks are facing is, I mean, in many cases, folks are just trying to get connected to services, and then eventually get connected to housing, and that's kind of the only way out of the situation at this time. I mean, it's not very complicated, but in order for someone to not be homeless anymore, they need to have a home.
Exactly.
Right now, what we're facing in Sacramento is there really appears to be a housing shortage, where we have a number of folks out there who, and not just folks who are experiencing homelessness, but this is everybody out there who is looking at a housing market that just can't meet the need of everyone that needs housing at this point in time. So the numbers that I saw is that we have a 2 or 3% vacancy rate, which means there's only 2 or 3% of all the houses out there, or homes or apartments, that are open at any one point in time.
Yes.
And that's a really, really small amount. So then anytime that something opens up, you have a whole host of folks who are immediately jumping on that apartment and getting into it.
Yeah.
So with that kind of competition for any kind of housing unit, it makes it very, very difficult for folks who are experiencing homelessness, let alone everyone else, to try and get into housing and get off of the streets. So housing is a big barrier right now to folks who are experiencing homelessness, and I mean, we really need a lot more housing in this community if we're going to really work to reduce the rate of homelessness that we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is you know, folks want to get connected to services as well.
Yeah.
But when people don't have a regular place to lay their head every night, or to, you know, plug in an alarm clock and try and get up and get out and get to their appointments on time, it makes it that much more difficult for them to be compliant and show up for all of their, you know, mental health appointments, substance abuse treatment appointments, medical appointments, everything that they need to do to take care of themselves, to get them to a better place where they can then, you know, pull their life together, because that's what everyone is, you know, everyone is kind of looking at folks who are experiencing homelessness as though, you know, they're not doing everything that they can. However, they've been dealt such a difficult hand to deal with right now. It would be difficult for anybody who is experiencing what they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis to try and find a way forward.
Yeah.
So I see a gap in services. I see a gap in housing. Both of these things are some major barriers to folks who are, you know, trying to find their way forward and get up and off the streets.
Yeah, I know one of the things we talked about when you and I met, we talked about when somebody is coming out of a situation like this, if they apply for housing, an apartment, and someone else applied for that may have good credit, a long rental history, you know, the landlord is most likely going to lean towards that person, because the person that's coming out of homeless may have a gap in rental history, income may not be as good as the other person, so that also poses a problem as well.
In addition to that, though, there's also, there's Section 8 vouchers out there. There's Shelter Plus Care vouchers. I mean, they do exist. I've worked with them in the past.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, though, they only cover what they call the fair market rent. So whatever the fair market rent is determined by HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development, is kind of the maximum that can be paid to the landlord. However, landlords can get well and above what the fair market rent is right now.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times they can charge above and beyond what is covered by one of those vouchers, and it makes it even that much more difficult. So then our folks get priced out of housing, right from the start.
Wow. I was reading an article that was published in July 2010, and it talked about the increase in the homeless population here in Sacramento County, it stated that it has rose 30% since 2015. They gave the numbers as 2015. It was saying, I guess it was 2,822 people that was homeless, but now it's up to 3,665 without a permanent shelter or a home, according to that article. Why do you think that is, and why do you think that it's such an increase at such a rapid pace?
Well, and the other thing to keep in mind with those figures is that the starting point was from 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So we had a 30% increase according to, based on how the count was done 2 years ago versus how it was done most recently at the beginning of this calendar year.
Yeah.
On top of that, it's close to an 80% increase in the number of people who are experiencing homelessness and who are stuck out on the streets.
Yeah.
So that number has definitely increased as well, and it's certainly become a much more visible issue than what folks have become accustomed to.
Yeah.
So there's that piece of it as well. In terms of the why, a lot of times, I mean, I look at exactly kind of what we have in terms of our homeless system, what resources we have, the need that we have for permanent supportive housing for folks that have been that are identified as chronically homeless, and these are folks that have been living in a state of homelessness for 12 months or more, and they have a diagnosable disability of some sort, whether it's medical, mental health, or substance abuse. So we could certainly use more permanent supportive housing for those folks.
Yeah.
But on top of that, like I said, just the housing market being what it is, you've got a lot of folks that are currently, really teetering on the edge. I mean, you can just think across your own group of friends. So how many folks are kind of just living one paycheck to the next, and are essentially one paycheck away from being homelessness?
Yes. Yeah.
It's quite a few.
Yeah.
When I think even to my own friends. So it's not a good situation out there. And all it takes is one crisis to really push someone over the edge, and then all of a sudden they can't make rent, and then they're going to go through an eviction process. Exactly. And then what happens then is that person then starts cycling through friends and family and couch surfing here and couch surfing there, because they're not trying to come into the homeless system whatsoever. And in some cases they can work and stay with those friends of theirs or family of theirs and get back into housing, which is kind of the goal. Yeah. Except for that, like I said, now that housing market is so saturated, and now they have an eviction on their record. Yeah. So it makes it even more difficult for them to get back into housing. Yeah. And so it's just this drawn out process where people are trying to make it, and at some point something's got to give. Yeah. And either they make it and they're able to stay out, or they're not able to. And what we're seeing is that more and more folks are going down that path, and it makes me concerned at multiple levels in terms of the set of services that we have for folks who are experiencing homelessness, because we have so many more who are currently on the streets and in need of those services. And on top of that, what's going on with the housing market and what we've seen over the last 10 years. Granted, I've only been in Sacramento for 3 months, but I also do my homework. Yeah. And that looks to be a major contributing factor for what we're facing today. Yeah. So it's scary stuff. It really is. Yeah. You're absolutely right.
I'm wondering, how is the homeless population here different than the homeless population in Connecticut? Do you see any similarities, or just, what do you think?
I'd say, like I said, it's a much more visible issue here. And I think I read the studies that I read is that we, in California, we have about 10% of the U.S.'s population here. Yeah. But we have upwards of 20% of the nation's population of folks who are experiencing homelessness. Yes. That points to me, that points to something much larger. And I think that speaks directly to what's going on with our housing market, and just our ability to create housing to meet the need of the population that's expanding. And it's also because California is on the coast. We also have a lot of international interest in people who want to have property or a home or whatever,
Yeah.
somewhere, just inside the U.S. And so you get a lot of folks that are coming from overseas, and there's overseas interest as well.
Yeah.
Not to say that we shouldn't welcome those folks, but at the same time, in order to accommodate everybody, we need to make sure that we have enough housing to meet the demand.
Yeah.
In addition to that, where I was in Connecticut, I was in Lower Fairfield County, Connecticut, which is just kind of that southwestern tip that's just across the, right on the border there from New York. And so we had a lot of folks that would come up and out of New York looking for, a better path forward than what they were seeing in New York City. So people would, sometimes come out of New York in addition to people who are already in Connecticut. For the most part, the folks that we saw were from Connecticut. Similarly, I've heard stories of how, there's a lot of, theories about how there are so many people from out of state who are coming here to Connecticut to be homeless because it's nice, warm weather.
Yeah, wow.
Although, in July, I
Yeah.
wouldn't have said that. It was too hot here. And it was when it gets upwards of 110 degrees.
Yeah.
But what they found at the point in time count was that between 2/3 and 3/4 of the folks that were surveyed and were experiencing homelessness here, they're from California. These are Sacramento people.
Exactly.
So these are our citizens.
Yeah.
These aren't necessarily people from somewhere else or from Reno or from wherever. There might be a couple, but for the most part, the majority of our folks here that we're serving are our people.
Yeah.
So there's that piece of it to consider too. So it's every area is different, and every homeless system that I've worked within has its own way of operating. So New York City, all the resources there, all the people there operates in its way.
Yeah.
And then what I was working with in the Connecticut area was also a very different scenario as well, because you had large towns or cities that were not too far from each other, but they had different sets of services at each stop. And it was trying to figure out, okay, so how do we work as a region? How do we work together to find a more efficient way forward with trying to get people housed?
Yeah.
And with the system that we had been able to set up there, we were able to end first chronic veterans homelessness, and that's again homeless veterans who had been on the streets for a year or more and diagnosed with some sort of disability.
Wow.
Then we were able to end veterans homelessness as a whole, as a state.
Wow.
And that doesn't mean that someone who's a veteran, we just don't have anyone who becomes homeless. What happens is they're identified and they're prioritized based on their veteran status. And as soon as someone is identified, we get them right into housing.
Oh, wow.
So then after that, now we're also trying to work on anyone who is what we call chronically homeless. And they were very close to ending chronic homelessness in Connecticut when I left there. I'd say they were probably 200 units short of, housing units short as a state, which is pretty good, to getting to what they call functional zero, where they have enough supply to meet the demand of folks who are experiencing homelessness.
Wow. Wow. What would people be surprised to learn about the homeless population? What would surprise them about them?
Ooh, that's a good question. They're funny, they're smart, they are, you got many folks who are optimistic and hopeful and I walk around Friendship Park at Loaves Fishes, and I saying good morning to people, and it's there's one gentleman, and he'll say good morning, and I'll say good morning, and I'll ask him how are you doing, and every day it's like, well, I'm doing a lot better now that I've seen your smile.
Oh, that's awesome.
And they're just people, and just like any person, once you get to know them a little bit, they're just wonderful to get to know.
Yeah.
So and at the same time, look, they're going through tragedy, they're going through hardship, they're going through all these difficult things, and they're trying to persevere and move on to the next day.
Yeah.
Because they're hoping that, maybe tomorrow I'll get some housing, maybe tomorrow I'll get that thing that I need to continue to exist. Maybe I'll get a job.
Yeah.
I got a lot of folks that are trying to get jobs, but at the same time, if they're stuck out there living on the streets, it makes it hard for them to have the stability in their life to get a good night's rest every night, wake up on time, get cleaned up, because they're out on the streets, or they're sleeping wherever they can sleep.
Yeah.
In an effort to just make it to the next day.
Yeah.
So I got folks who are wanting to work. I got folks who they're not able to work. They wish they could work, but
Yeah.
they through disability, or something happened where they were in need of a medical procedure, they couldn't afford it, and now they're disabled.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of individual stories, and some days it's hard, and some days it brings a smile to my face to be able to work with the guests that come by and come see us. So so far it's been a wonderful experience down there, and I'm thankful to be a part of it.
That's awesome. We talked about earlier when you kind of communicated that the folks that's out on the streets are Sacramento natives. I have to believe that some of them do have family members here in Sacramento County. And what would you say to the family members in terms of trying to give a helping hand to reach their loved ones that they know that's out on the street that needs to help? Because I think that a lot of times, people don't really understand a person's struggle. If a person's struggling with drug addiction, or if a person is struggling with a form of mental health condition, a lot of times if a person has not been educated or have not went through that themselves, a lot of times they don't understand it, and their first train of thought is to detach themselves from the person because of the situation. So what would you say to a person that may have a loved one on the street that may be, struggling? How could they be of a support to their loved one?
I would say, in one way, it's, reach out to your local homeless agency and get to know them, their services. Try and get people connected to the right sets of services. A lot of times what we see is, there are some instances where, people have whether they, have their first psychotic break, or they become ill, and they can't make it work where they're at anymore without help. And they don't get that help for one reason or another, and then things kind of spiral out of control from there. In other situations, I see it where the individuals have, they've become homeless. They don't want to bother people with their current situation, and so they it's the person experiencing homelessness that pulls back. So there's that situation too, and we got to be careful when we talk about this, because we don't want to. It's no one's fault, per se.
Exactly.
And it's sometimes a situation unfolds in a way where A leads to B leads to C, and then this person is experiencing homelessness now. There's a lot of situations out there where maybe someone becomes homeless purely for financial reasons. But then they're out on the streets and they're not able to sort out a housing situation or whatever they need to sort out to get back into housing. And then what happens is time on the streets as well is really hard.
Yeah.
The process of someone losing their home, that's a traumatic experience for someone to all of a sudden, like, all right, so you got to be homeless now.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You can't come back inside. Stay outside. You can't come back in here.
Yeah.
That's a whole, traumatic incident in and of itself. Couple that with, having, folks who are living on the streets day in and day out, and then there's the, concerns about, getting assaulted or, and all the hardship that happens out on the streets. And then a lot of times what will happen is that the mind is, a human mind is a wonderful thing, but at the same time it's also trying to cope with all these difficulties that are happening, and all these tragedies and all these hardships. And in some cases this is how mental illness can develop. So someone experiences trauma over and over and over again, something's going to give.
Exactly.
And so what we often see is that there are folks who find their way onto the streets because they were ill or experiencing a mental illness, and then we've got other folks that they were perfectly fine, but they've been on the streets for so long, or they've been through certain scenarios or situations that caused them trauma, and now they've become mentally ill, or maybe now they've decided that, you know what, in order to cope, you know, they'll start doing drugs, of, you know, one type of drug or another, because they're just trying to make it from today to get into tomorrow.
Yeah.
And it's hard to see further than that when they're not sure what they're going to eat,
Yeah.
you know, for the next meal, let alone for the next day.
Yeah, I know what you're saying is to be true, because I know someone that lives in another state who is a young lady. I think she's about 25, 26. And she has two little girls, maybe 3 and 4, and she's currently homeless. And she's moved around from shelter to shelter. You know, lived from couch to couch with her girls, and people they didn't want to be bothered with her. They didn't, and I'm just being honest with you. They didn't want to deal with that situation because of 2 little girls. And I remember her calling a loved one, because I'm connected with the loved one, and the loved one would kind of vent to me and was telling me that she will say how she's depressed, she want to give up, she don't want to live anymore. And so you start to see all these tendencies that wasn't there at first, fear and anxiety, suicidal thoughts that wasn't there at first they started to develop, you know.
Yeah.
And so I would try to talk to him and reassure him that, you know, she'll be okay, but you just need to try to talk to her, make sure she's connected with resources in the area. And it's really, really hard for her, like extremely hard for her.
Yeah.
I read text messages that she sent her loved one, and I'm like, man, you know, so it is definitely a problem. And I feel like what can we do as a community? I mean, you know, just regular people like you and I mean, like, I know we got jobs, you know, I know, you know, there's other resources out there. I know about 3 years ago, a friend of mine and we would take our own money and we would buy like just food, you know, water, sandwiches, apples and stuff like that, chips. And, you know, I would give him the money to go and purchase the stuff, and he would go and bag it up at home. He'll meet me downtown off of 8th Street in that area, and we'll just pass it out. We did this for about a good 4 or 5 months. And for me, it was very rewarding. It was very rewarding, you know, and the people came, they was very nice, you know, and that was his first time experiencing something like that, you know, and I could tell he was a little bit nervous in the beginning, but as time went on, he was very motivated to do it, you know. And so I feel like, you know, there are things that the community, we everyday people, we can be doing too, to give back to help this problem that's going on.
Sure. So, I mean, certainly on a day-to-day basis, there's a number of organizations out there, Loaves Fishes included, that accepts donations, whether it's food, whether it's, you know, clothing, whether it is different types of resources. If we're talking about families, baby formula and diapers and all kinds of different things, basic toiletries and you know, things that folks need on a day-to-day basis while they're just trying to hold it together to make it to tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's one of the things that with Loaves and Fishes is that, I mean, like I said, we could not do what we do without volunteers. And
that's awesome.
I'm often, you know, I'll go in and I'll chat with volunteers, and I will tell them that exact same thing.
Yeah.
And they've heard it several times from me at this point in time.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, whether it's folks who want to get out there and volunteer and help directly, folks who want to get out there and collect donations, or they want to, you know, contribute to different homeless resources out there and nonprofits that serve folks who are at risk. There's a number of different types of opportunities. I mean, Loaves and Fishes, I mean, on our website, which is just sacloaves.org, we've got a number of different ways that people can get connected with us. For those folks that are more interested in going down to a city hall meeting or you know, county supervisors and advocating for different types of services, that's another great way that people can get involved and to speak up for people who, you know, on their day-to-day struggle of existing, you know, making one of those meetings and telling folks exactly what their struggle has been. It's not high on their list because they're just, like I said, trying to make it to tomorrow.
Yeah.
But we do have people that come out, whether it's some of our homeless guests that want to come down and share what's going on. In other cases, it's people who are concerned from the community that are speaking up for these folks that don't necessarily have a voice.
Yeah, that's important.
So that's another way that folks can also get involved. So the opportunities are certainly out there, and I encourage folks that anyone that is interested in doing so, get out there and do what you can.
Yeah, yeah. Do you guys have any fundraisers activity throughout the year, or at all, or?
We do a couple things. I mean, for the most part, what we do is we'll send a letter out to the community members, people that have, whether they've donated to us or there are other folks out there in the community that tells a little bit about our services every month, and we call it our monthly appeal letter.
Yeah.
To get people a little bit more information about what's going on with Loaves and Fishes, and asking people to donate where available. We're trying to do a little bit more in terms of fundraising. So there will be some events coming up here probably in the spring.
Okay.
The holidays are certainly a very busy time for us. We get a lot of folks that come through and need our services.
Okay. Wow.
And anyone that is interested in getting out with us, and whether it's volunteering or donating food or want to contribute to our cause, they can certainly do that. And the best place to start that whole process is with our main website, which is sacloaves.org.
Okay. So how can a person get involved if they actually want to volunteer? Do they fill out an application? Do you guys provide training? How does that work?
So we do. Typically we do an orientation session with everyone that wants to come through, and in that they get a tour of the facilities and told about the different places where they might be able to volunteer on a day-to-day basis. A lot of people start with our dining room, which, like I said, can serve up to 800, 900 people at a time. So not all at once, mind you. We're gonna cycle people through.
Yeah.
But sometimes we'll do a meal and we'll serve that many people. And with that kind of volume of people who are coming through and need a meal, that piece of it is very, very important. So, and then for the folks that want to come in and do that kind of work regularly, we have volunteers that sometimes they come in every week. Sometimes we've got volunteer groups that come in once a month. And we got some groups that come in just on a one-off basis when they have the time, and they're able to schedule it at the beginning of the month. So, so we have a volunteer director that helps coordinate all those volunteers that come in, because, like I said, we got so many people that come in and help us out in one form or another.
That's awesome.
Sometimes we've got people who, depending on what they do, and in their professional lives, they might have something that they'd be willing to help us out with in that regard too. So it's. The level of interest from the community I'm astounded by it. I'm inspired by it, and it's so wonderful.
Nice. I know we talked about things like the holiday you have, and that's with anybody, because we have a volunteer program within my organization too. Mm-hmm. But it seems like during the holiday, it's more the volume of volunteers are more higher during the holidays.
Sure.
And so after the holidays, you tend to, the volume kind of goes down a little bit. Mm-hmm. But the need is still there. Mm-hmm. So, we still need them, and it was what I'm trying to say.
Yep.
So that's just a side note. So whoever's watching this program, if you're volunteering just during the holiday, just be mindful that the volunteers are still needed throughout the year, even when it's in the spring or the summer as well. So
no, we need volunteers 364 days out of the year.
Yeah.
We are actually closed on one day.
Yeah.
We give our dining hall a day off because they need a break every now and then too.
Nice. So if I know we kind of talked about donating clothes. So if someone wants to donate clothes, and that's an important factor too, because we want them to be able to donate not used clothes but new clothes, and let's kind of talk about why it's important to donate new clothes instead of used clothes.
Well, there's a lot of great clothes out there that are lightly used and all that. Unfortunately, it hasn't been our policy to take those. A lot of times we need clothes that are new. That way we can be sure that what we're giving out to the folks are clean, ready to use, and I don't know. It's a nice thing when someone can, the folks that have been experiencing the hardship that they experience on a day-to-day basis, that they can get something nice and clean and new to put on for the day.
Yeah.
So there's been, in the past, there's always some concerns about whether it's, what's coming in, or if it's the right size, or something that's, shrunk and just,
Yeah.
where the sleeves are real long and the body's real short and it doesn't necessarily fit anymore.
Yeah.
So again, it's still good clothing, but at the same time, we're still trying to provide our folks something nice to put on each day, especially if they got something coming up like a job interview or a housing interview.
Yeah, I mean, I would want something new, for sure. So I can understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Are there different challenges that the homeless population face during certain seasons? Like, for example, do you feel like they face different challenges in the wintertime when it's raining opposed to summertime, or?
Well, this summer was a really hot summer. And I can only say that based off of what everyone was telling me. This was my first summer here in Sacramento. So, everyone kept telling me that, but it's a dry heat. But once you get above 105, 110 degrees, hot's hot.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
And from what I understand, this was a particularly unseasonably hot summer. So that piece is definitely of concern, because you got to worry about heat stroke with folks. You got to worry about whether or not they're going to be able to stay hydrated. And sun sickness is certainly a major concern for folks when they're out there in the heat of the day.
Yeah.
As we get to the winter and the cold and the rain and all that, and if folks can't find any shelter from that cold and rain, they're going to get soaked to the bone, and they're going to be at risk of pneumonia, at risk of general illness, and it gets to be pretty hard living out there on the streets.
Yeah.
So there's that concern as well. At Friendship Park, where folks can come in each day during the week and get kind of some reprieve from the elements. We've got different gazebos set up all around our park where people can take shelter from the sun or take shelter from the cold and the rain. And we've got misters set up so that people, when it's hot outside, they'll get a little spurts of water coming down on them too to help them cool off.
Nice.
And in the winter, we've got heated gazebos as well to try and get people warmed up and safely through the day.
That's awesome. I don't know, I asked you that question when we met about the clothing because I don't know, I just, I think it's important. And even now, it's about to get cold outside.
Yes.
And, the sweaters and the jackets and, even the blankets and stuff, that's needed.
I mean, one thing that folks are having to deal with right now, and it's certainly in the news these days, is the concerns regarding hepatitis A.
Oh, yes.
So that's, certainly in Southern California, there's a couple of cities where there's an epidemic, and there are some major concerns, here in Sacramento about, okay, so what are we doing to handle all this, and prepare ourselves? Because look, I mean, while right now we're coming across a situation where people who are experiencing homelessness are certainly more prone to coming down with hepatitis A, just because general lack of access to bathrooms and wash stations. But anyone can get it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just homeless. Hepatitis A doesn't care if a person is homeless or not. It's just looking for a host at that point in time. So it's out there. It's of real concern to folks. Right now, we're working with Sacramento County, the health department there, to set up vaccination clinics at Loaves Fishes, and they'll be doing some other places, setting up clinics at other places around town to get people vaccinated for hepatitis A. As well as the flu, because it's that time of year as well. So we're trying to set up for that, but then getting back to how people can get involved and with an advocacy hat on, I would encourage people to try and reach out to their elected officials to advocate for bathrooms and wash facilities for folks, so that anyone who's experiencing homelessness out there can be able to go to the bathroom safely and in a healthy manner.
Yes. Have there been any success stories in your career as working with the homeless population Like, have you known anybody to experience being homeless and just came out of that situation and, you know, just started working, got a career and think? Because I want to kind of, you know, bring that up if you have any.
Absolutely. Where I came from, a major role that I had was in terms of getting people employed and then helping them find housing. So I oversaw the programs that helped them do each of those things. And those were two of the, I don't know, most wonderful programs to work with, because you get to see two successes with folks, and sometimes at the same time, where someone would come back and they'd say, you know what, I got a job and I start on Monday, and then they go to their job, and then at the end of the second week they come back with their paycheck.
That's awesome.
And then we go help them set up a bank account at that point in time. Or
That's awesome.
the real big one though is when someone came back and they're jingling keys in their hand.
That's awesome.
And they get, you know, they got an apartment, they're just moving in, and they're like, look at me.
Yes.
Absolutely wonderful. So where I was at, and we tracked a lot of this information. So they just finished up this last fiscal year, which ended at the end of June, and they had made more than 200 job placements that year, and more than 200 housing placements. More than 200 men, women, and children had made it into permanent housing in the previous 12 months, which was just outstanding. Already in my time here, I'm learning about different folks who had come to Loaves and Fishes as a guest, and people would come back to the park, and they'd say like, "Oh, are you gonna get in line?" I'm like, "No, I'm not getting in line. I'm here to tell you that I made it in my apartment."
That's awesome.
So and then they wave goodbye, and then we don't necessarily see them again, unless they're coming by for a social call at that point in time.
That's awesome.
It's absolutely wonderful, and that's kind of, those are the victories that we're hanging on to when we do this work. And we don't see as much of them on our end of it, because we're the very front end of the whole spectrum of services. So there's us, and then there's after us there's shelters and transitional housing and permanent supportive housing and all kinds of support services in between all those. And we're really kind of one of those front door services where folks who are on the streets and they're trying to get into some of those other programs, they need assistance in the day to day.
Yeah.
But when we got folks that come back and show us that they made it,
yes,
it just warms your heart.
Wow. Yeah. So where do Section 8 play a role in this? Because when a person is homeless and they apply for like Section 8, I mean, are they moved up to the top of the list, or how does that work?
Well, so it differs, from area to area. So where I came from in Connecticut, and I'm still learning how the system works here in Sacramento, but where I came from in Connecticut, we had a system set up so that they would have a housing list through the housing authority, and the housing authority has to honor their list, but they can change how they pull from it. So the housing authority that we worked with in Stamford, Connecticut, they had agreed that every fifth name that they were going to pull, it was going to be the next chronically homeless person from our regional housing list, and that was based off of anyone that was coming into the system. They applied for, they met with a housing coordinator, they got on this list, they got an assessment and basically prioritized based on their vulnerability. So anyone who was particularly vulnerable, mainly due to how long they've been homeless, if they have any medical issues, mental health, substance abuse, if they have a bunch of things going on, they get prioritized into housing first, because the cost of providing them services while they're stuck out on the streets in a situation of homelessness, it's going to require a lot more emergency services to work with that person on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to putting them in housing and then wrapping services around them there.
Okay.
So emergency services are very, very expensive. So whether we're talking about the police department, the fire department, ambulances, emergency rooms, all these things are very expensive interventions that ultimately cost money to the taxpayer.
Yes.
So it makes sense for us as a community then to house those most vulnerable folks, get them into housing so that their medical, mental health, and substance abuse interventions can be provided at a much cheaper level.
Yeah.
On a scheduled basis, as opposed to something where they don't know when it's going to come up, but they're also not connected to anybody necessarily for those services. and it's just going to be more expensive. So what they have found over time is that, and these are, I'm trying to remember where I got the numbers from, but it costs a community roughly about $45,000 per person to keep a person homeless.
Wow.
But if you house that person, that number drops by about $15,000 per person.
Wow.
So we're already paying all this money anyway for all these emergency services to folks. If we just get everyone housed, that number is going to drop substantially.
Yes.
And it's going to save the community money to have to pay for permanent supportive housing and scheduled services as opposed to purely emergency services and keeping them on the streets.
Yes, that's exactly right. Wow. I know, sometimes when I'm riding throughout Sacramento County, there are times that you do see police officers talking to some of the homeless population, and I know I've actually seen them asking them to remove themselves from certain locations, and to only see, because if you drive down, they're just moving from one spot to another one because they need some place to be.
Sure.
But to me, that's not really an effective way to use law enforcement, and I know there's been times too when law enforcement have been placed more in certain areas because of complaints from people.
Sure. Because
people have a lack of understanding what it's like to be homeless. So do you think that's a sufficient way of using, taxpayer dollars to hire more police officers to put in a certain location to, get rid of these homeless people? Or do you feel like, it could have been used in a more effective manner?
Well, I think that, law enforcement certainly plays a certain role in our community, and they're here to keep everyone safe. And they're oftentimes the first responders towards, to any sort of situation. So it's the position that they're put in is a difficult spot.
Exactly.
And so I just, to start off with that piece of it. So,
yeah.
What I would like to see is people getting connected with services as opposed to having to move from one spot to another. But that being said, right now what we're seeing is a situation where we don't have enough services. We don't have enough shelter.
That's exactly
And we don't have enough of the resources that we need to pull from. And so the proactive approach where we'd like to connect them with those services, we're not able to do right now. And so people are falling back on this reactive approach of just saying, well, you need to move over there.
Yeah.
Or you need to move away from the spot and you can't be here.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense from the standpoint of, I understand why we are here,
yeah,
and why this is the response, but at the same time, it's not the most effective way to move forward with it, and it's not the most effective way to help folks.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to see much more emphasis on connecting people with services, getting them in shelter, developing housing so that people who are in shelter have somewhere to move into, which frees up more shelter beds there. So it's this whole notion of a systems approach.
Yeah.
But right now, what we don't have is a balanced system. So right now, we have some of these things on the front end. We don't have enough of the housing.
Yeah.
And so we have a bottleneck then for our different interventions. And so people aren't moving through the system; they're getting stuck.
Yeah, I know with the mental health piece of it, law enforcement are now being educated and trained on how to respond with mental health clients now, because at first it was like, okay, just 5150 them, or lock them up, because there was a lack of training.
Yeah.
So I think that even with the homeless population, I think that same approach can be as effective. Maybe having them have a booklet with resources where an area where they could be in, like the park or different locations and stuff. Or maybe give them a ride somewhere. But I feel like it definitely needs to be a different approach to handling a situation like that. Because they can't help their situation at that moment.
Yeah. Well, to the notion that it's against the law to be homeless is certainly one issue. At the same time, on the flip side of it, with Sacramento Police Department, their impact team and their relationship with different homeless providers and trying to connect folks with resources, there's a lot of good work that's being done in those impact teams and kind of what they're doing to like I said, connect people with resources, help de-escalate situations as opposed to try and get, hurt it towards a different kind of situation. But I think that a lot of good work has been done by the Sacramento PD. They're not perfect, but nobody is.
Yeah.
And they're doing the best that they can with the resources that they have as well. So,
Yeah.
But they're also, they're a part of this whole homeless response system. And a lot of times, like I said, they are often the first face that people will
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
So, in many cases, they may have to come at it from a standpoint of they have to enforce this issue of no camping, or they have to enforce, what, you can't stay here, you have to move on, go somewhere else. And it's not, oftentimes it can be from a very reluctant place that they have to send that message, but at the same time, they're also trying to de-escalate and keep it from becoming a more difficult situation with that person. Sometimes they do take them to other places. Sometimes
That's good
we
to
have
hear.
people who get dropped off to us from Sacramento Police Department.
Yes.
You know what, they said that they needed a meal and they're stuck out there and they don't know what to do. They get a ride.
That's awesome.
And they get dropped off with us sometimes. So we've got like I said, we've got a good relationship with Sacramento PD. They do a lot of good work, and they're not perfect, but nobody is, and they're
Yeah.
trying to do what they can to find their way forward with the rest of us, because look, the police department, it's made up of a bunch of officers. They're citizens of Sacramento,
Yeah.
and they're also trying to figure out, all right, so what do we do?
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for being on our show. We've run out of time. And that's it today for this edition of Mental Health Matters. If you enjoyed this particular show, or if you like a DVD copy of the show, or if you would like to be a guest on our show, please dial 916-366-4600. Thank you.
When I think of where I've been, the good times and the bad, on a scale of 1 to 10, either way I'm glad, 'cause I'm not alone. As I'm reaching for the phone, your voice is there, you really care, you're my comfort zone. Sometimes when I'm lost, crushed beneath the pain, though I can't afford the cost, I just smile and play the game. But there's a healing place where I cannot pretend. Your smiling face, your heart's embrace heals me again. So even when the storm is strong and I'm deaf to my own cry, I faintly hear a distant song and I simply can't deny.